In Hollywood history, few names are as dazzling and as scandalous as Marlon Brando. He was not only the immortal Godfather on screen, but also the symbol of a generation of actors determined to tear up the rigid rules of classic Hollywood. When Brando appeared, the whole world had to pay attention. From his defiant eyes and husky voice to the way he turned every character into a living organism. He was called the man who changed acting, the one who brought realism into cinema and laid the groundwork for a new era. Yet behind the halo, Brando was a rebellious genius who refused to bow. He saw Hollywood as a fraudulent machine, a stage for power and pretense. While the world cheered, Brando threw himself into backstage battles, confronting studio moguls, refusing the Oscar in protest of US politics, and even openly challenging the director who had put him on top. More striking still, Brando's private life was constantly roiled by scandal. He made shocking public confessions about sex, same-sex relationships, and complex affairs with both men and women. Brando turned himself into a paradox, a venerated monument who also shattered Hollywood's moral norms. For him, cinema was only one part. The rest was rebellion, family tragedy, and headline-making scandals no one dared to name outright. But the truth behind Brando's genius was far darker. Marlon Brando was born on the 3rd of April, 1924, in Omaha, Nebraska, into a family that looked stable on the surface but was fractured within. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was a cold businessman and a heavy drinker who routinely inflicted psychological abuse on the family. His mother, Dorothy Julia Pennebaker, was a free-spirited woman whose dream of the stage had been crushed by marriage and alcohol dependence. She was the first to plant in Brando a love of art, even if she couldn't be a safe anchor for her children. Brando's childhood was marked by a lack of affection. He later admitted that his father's indifference and violence carved a wound into his soul that never healed. His mother, though loving, was controlled by drink and would sometimes leave the children alone through the night in her bouts of intoxication. Intelligent yet unruly, young Marlon learned early to resist authority, starting with his father's OS. At school, Brando quickly became the rebellious kid. Teachers acknowledged his innate intelligence but constantly complained about his defiance and undisciplined behavior. He was expelled multiple times for pranks, skipping class, even mocking teachers to their faces. Yet within that unruly temperament, the seeds of acting talent had been sown. Brando could mimic anyone's voice and mannerisms, becoming a shapeshifter even in childhood mischief. In 1935, the family moved to Illinois. Brando faced crushing loneliness. He felt adrift in a world where his father criticized, his mother drank, and he had no place to belong. That emptiness drove him to the stage, the only place he felt free. In school plays, he discovered that when he stood under the lights, he could escape real life, the cold father and the suffering mother. The path was anything but straight. In 1941, after repeated trouble, he was expelled from high school, desperate and angry. His father sent him to Shattuck Military Academy. But instead of molding Brando into a disciplined young man, the school had the opposite effect. Brando defied authority, taunted instructors, and was eventually expelled. After that failure, he drifted through odd jobs, ditch digging, auto repair, factory work, but deep down, he remained haunted by art. In 1943, he left Illinois for New York, studying at the New School and then at the Actors Studio under Stella Adler, one of the great teachers of method acting. Adler saw something rare in Brando, the ability to transmute real emotion into artistic power. She encouraged him to mind the pain of his childhood, his anger at his father, his disappointment in his mother, and bring all of it to the stage. For Brando, it was liberation. Acting wasn't just a profession, it was a way to wrestle with himself and the ghosts of his past. In those years, the image of a rebellious genius took shape. He refused formulas and rejected Hollywood's mechanical acting. For Brando, every role had to be a real life, so real the audience believed they were seeing a person, not a scripted character. A wretched childhood, an innate defiance, and training in New York laid the foundation for Marlon Brando's legendary path, a path both blazing and storm-tossed. And that foundation carried him to a turning point, from Broadway stages to the Hollywood screen, where he would change film history. New York in the early 1942nd was harsh but fertile ground for young artists hungry to break through. Among hundreds of actors scrambling for a chance, Marlon Brando stood out as something strange and new. He didn't fit the standard Hollywood mold of the handsome, polished leading man. He radiated wildness, defiance, and intensity as if he wasn't acting, but simply living. His first big break came when he was cast as Stanley Kowalski in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway in 1947. In a sweat-stained t-shirt with a challenging glare, Brando turned Kowalski into a new kind of sex symbol, raw and magnetic. Audiences were shocked. Critics were stunned. No one had ever pushed realism to such a bare, animal level. Brando's name thundered across New York. In 1951, Elia Kazan's film adaptation of A Streetcar Named Desire carried Brando from stage to Hollywood. Stanley Kowalski became an icon and earned him his first Oscar nomination. He then proved himself again with Viva Zapata, 1952, and especially On the Waterfront, 1954. As Terry Malloy, a former boxer torn between silence and conscience, he delivered the immortal line, "I could have been a contender," a testament to the emotional force he brought to cinema. The role won him his first Oscar and marked a new era of acting in Hollywood. At his peak, Brando wasn't merely an actor. He was a storm. He broke rules and turned sets into laboratories. Unlike earlier stars who clung to flawless images, Brando stripped away surface beauty to dig into a character's interior life. He wielded method, acting like a weapon, profoundly influencing a generation. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and Jack Nicholson all cited Brando as their guiding light. Even as the spotlight enveloped him, cracks began to show. Brando was notoriously difficult to work with. He arrived late, rewrote lines on the spot, and sometimes ignored the director entirely. To him, Hollywood was a place that sells lies, and he didn't hide his contempt. That rebelliousness, which helped make him a legend, also planted the seeds for endless conflict. The 1,960 saw a downturn. After a string of flops, Hollywood nearly turned its back on him. He was called washed up, a genius self-destructing through sheer indifference. Then came one of cinema's greatest comebacks, Vito Corleone in The Godfather, 1972. When Francis Ford Coppola chose Brando, studios protested. They said he was too troublesome, too overweight, and no longer marketable. Coppola stood firm, and Brando proved them wrong. With silvered hair, a gravelly voice, and cotton stuffed into his cheeks to shape the character, he turned Vito Corleone into an immortal figure. The role won him his second Oscar and restored him to the summit. At that very height, Brando chose rebellion again. He refused the Academy Award to protest Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans, sending Sacheen Littlefeather, a Native woman, to speak in his place. The world was stunned. Once more, Brando showed he would never kneel to the system, even the one that had made his legend. Marlon Brando moved from Broadway to Hollywood, from artistic monument to unruly star. But after the peak, darkness and scandal began to envelop his life, dragging him into a spiral of private tragedy and inevitable collapse. That was when Brando's dark side emerged, the genius hunted by the ghosts within his own soul. If the 1,952nd and early 72nd etched Brando as a genius who transformed cinema, the rest of his life became a chain of scandals, tragedies, and solitude. The rebellious streak that had once made him a legend now turned to devour him. He was one of Hollywood's most difficult collaborators, frequently late, unprepared, even demanding that lines be written on cue cards or taped to other actors so he could improvise. Some co-stars called him both a genius on screen and a nightmare on set. Director Frank Oz admitted that working with Brando on The Score, 2001, was grueling. Brando mocked him repeatedly, calling him Miss Piggy, because Oz had voiced a Muppet. Nor was his private life any less chaotic. He had countless affairs with both women and men. In his later years, Brando acknowledged he was bisexual and had relationships with figures such as James Dean and Richard Pryor. In a more conservative Hollywood era, these confessions were bombs, earning him praise for honesty and scorn for courting shock. The most haunting chapter, however, was family tragedy. In 1990, his son Christian Brando was sentenced to 10 years in prison for killing the boyfriend of his half-sister, Cheyenne Brando. 5 years later, Cheyenne, suffering from severe psychological trauma, died by suicide at 25. These blows broke Brando. He became reclusive, heavyset, and despondent. People recalled him sobbing when he spoke of his daughter, admitting that all his glory meant nothing beside that loss. Brando fell into self-destruction. He ate compulsively, gained extreme weight, and went from magnetic leading man to a severely obese figure in failing health. To escape the media, he hid on Tetiaroa, his private island in Tahiti, his once imagined paradise. Even there, the inner hauntings never loosened their grip. Scandals continued to swirl, accusations of abuse against partners, claims of fathering multiple children out of wedlock, entangled financial lawsuits. Hollywood, which had once canonized him, now saw him as uncontrollable. Studios were wary. Many directors refused to work with him. To the press, Brando was both predator and prey. He despised the media, but could never escape it. Interviews often turned combative, with Brando provoking, joking, or manufacturing scandal, only to later complain he'd been misunderstood. He once said, "Hollywood is where they kiss you on the cheek today and stab you in the back tomorrow." To many, Brando was a living contradiction, a revolutionary actor who reshaped cinema, yet a man dragged down by rebellion, desire, and family ghosts. He reached the heights every actor dreams of, then turned himself into a symbol of collapse and isolation. When the spotlight faded, his life entered its most tragic act, layered losses, failing health, and a death that felt preordained. This was the final catastrophe, the climax of a brilliant life tinged with mourning. By the late 1982nd and 1992nd, Marlon Brando's image was far from his glorious past. Once one of Hollywood's most magnetic men, he now appeared heavy, with a somber face and halting steps. The press mocked him as a star who lost himself, yet the wounds inside hurt far worse than the jeers outside. The family case that engulfed the world's media came when his son Christian was arrested in 1990 for killing the boyfriend of Cheyenne, Brando's daughter from another relationship. The world watched Brando in court, head bowed in despair. He begged the judge for mercy, admitting that his broken family and lifestyle had helped pave the way for the tragedy. Christian received a 10-year sentence. In that moment, the Godfather aura vanished, leaving only a helpless father. The wound barely scabbed when, in 1995, Cheyenne, once his beloved, beautiful daughter, died by suicide at 25 after years of depression. She had once said, "My father is a great man on screen, but in real life, he never belonged to us." The words were the final knife to Brando's heart. The man who had fought Hollywood now crumpled before blood-deep tragedy. In his final years, Brando lived almost in hiding. He battled diabetes, heart failure, and chronic lung disease. His weight ballooned past 150 kilograms, over 330 pounds, turning movement into torment. He retreated to his Beverly Hills home and occasionally to Tahiti, once a refuge, now only a sad memory. The public saw him only rarely on television, his voice rasping, body heavy, eyes tired. He admitted to overeating, to dull the pain, and living like a fugitive from his own past. On the 1st of July 2004, Marlon Brando died at a Los Angeles hospital of respiratory failure and heart failure, aged 80. He left quietly, so unlike his loud, scandal-filled life. His funeral was private, unadorned, attended only by family and a few close friends. His death did more than end a life. It closed an era. Hollywood lost one of his greatest actors, a genius who shattered rules, but also a deeply tragic man who left behind a tangle of unanswered questions. Brando once said, "Acting is the only way I can escape myself. Without it, I'm just a failure." In his passing, the world realized that even with acting, he could not outrun his shadows. And when the curtain fell, one question still echoed: was Brando's legacy that of an immortal genius or a grand tragedy of Hollywood? Marlon Brando is gone, but his name will never fade from film history. People can argue over scandal, condemn his rebellious temper and chaotic private life, but no one can deny that Brando revolutionized acting. He brought a new style, authentic, rough, alive, paving the way for generations to come. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Jack Nicholson, even Leonardo DiCaprio have all acknowledged his influence. Brando was also one of the few Hollywood artists who dared to challenge the system itself. From refusing the Oscar and speaking out for Native American rights to his shocking confessions about sex and power, he forced the world to see a Hollywood that was not just bright lights, but rife with deceit, discrimination, and hidden violence. Today, when we speak of Marlon Brando, two opposing images arise. the immortal Vito Corleone in The Godfather, and a tragic, lonely man consumed by his own life and family. In that contradiction, he becomes a mirror of Hollywood itself, a factory of legends that also grinds them down. We love Marlon Brando because he was a genius, but behind the glory, he was still only a human being, frail, conflicted, unable to escape his fated tragedies.